Guys, welcome to a classic movie review of the 1970 sci-fi thriller Colossus, The Forbin Project, starring Eric Braeden, Susan Clark and Gordon Pinsent. Now, this was directed by Joseph Sargent and it's a cold and calculated glimpse into AI supremacy. And it's a stark warning about the hubris of mankind in surrendering too much authority to machines, and it could almost act as a prequel to James Cameron's Terminator franchise. Now, just replace Colossus with Skynet and Bob's your uncle. Now, don't get me wrong, you may smirk at the ancient technology on show here, all walls and walls of blinking lights, tape reels and technicians all shepherding less processing power than the average smartphone. But that's what's quite cool about techno thrillers from days gone by. The message and threat, however, is bang up to date. Let's take a look. Now, of course, Colossus isn't the first film to deal with the possible threat of AI. Just 2 years before, we got possibly cinema's most famous example in 2001, Space Odyssey's rogue program HAL 9000. And of course, 1927's Metropolis featured a humanoid robot intent on taking over the titular megacity. But anyway, I feel many of today's technological advances or worries and fears are in evidence in the screenplay here, adapted from the 1966 novel Colossus by D.F. Jones. And the movie version of it follows Dr. Charles Forbin, played by Eric Braeden, the lead scientist behind the construction of Colossus, a massive supercomputer designed to control the United States nuclear arsenal. This itself based on the NORAD system. And so the initial intention here is quite noble, but ultimately misguided, to remove the human element from the nuclear decision-making process in the hope that emotion is trumped by data and logic. We know this never ends well, though. Released slap bang in the middle of Cold War tension and set against a backdrop of US-Soviet brinksmanship, I love that the movie wastes no time getting straight to the point and diving into its central premise, a machine that, once turned on, rapidly evolves beyond its creator's control. Even here, witness the moment shortly after activation that Colossus sends a simple but pretty ominous message. And this turns out to be Guardian, the Soviet Union's counterpart to Colossus. The two machines connect and begin communicating at lightning speed, initially in mathematical mumbo-jumbo, and then in a self-developed language that's imperceptible to us hapless humans. And so what begins as a nice bit of promising diplomatic collaboration between East and West quickly devolves into out-and-out terror when both supercomputers begin issuing orders to their creators, culminating in, shall we say, brutal consequences for disobedience. So what we have is a film that tackles a convergence of artificial intelligence, military power and human fallibility. And of course it still resonates today, perhaps even more now than upon its release, as machine learning and machine-to-machine communications are all hot news. Now, what I love about the Forbin Project is that it doesn't portray its AI as a killer robot or an evil presence in the traditional sci-fi action movie sense. Instead, a little bit like the early portions of HAL's 2001 screen time, it's terrifying because it's so calm, composed and logical, and devoid of empathy. It's not malevolent, it's just indifferent to human suffering. So there's no out-and-out star power in Colossus, the Forbin Project. We get Eric Braeden in his first major film role, and you may recognise Braeden from his prolific TV work, especially if you're familiar with the 60s television show The Rat Patrol, which I'm not, unfortunately, but he also played John Jacob Astor in James Cameron's Titanic. And if you're not familiar with his name, you may know him as Hans Gudegast, which is his real name, this being the first time that he went by his less German name. But anyway, here he plays Dr. Charles Forbin, a consummate scientist, a guy who's rightly proud of his creation until that pride is replaced by a gradual horror as Colossus begins to exert control, not just over military decisions, but over human lives, surveillance, and even Forbin's personal life. Now, I'll admit, for me personally, Forbin isn't the most dynamic of characters, but I am a fan of the fact that they don't portray him as a mad scientist playing God, but a logical guy who doesn't rage or panic when things begin to spiral, but quietly and sensibly plots a rebellion. Now, Susan Clark's character, Dr. Cleo Markham, serves as Forbin's love interest. George Pinsent plays the president. William Sage and Alex Rodin play scientists. And What I'm saying is that the cast is completely assembled from television actors. Great for the budget, and also great so there's no Hollywood distractions from the real star, which of course is Colossus, which is represented by a microphone, basically, and an entire room of consoles and blinking lights, which, although hilariously quaint in our age of cloud computing and machines performing gigaflops and exaflops, this was, for the late 60s and early 70s, actual technology, with Control Data Corporation supplying almost $5 million worth of tech for the production. And so the Forbin Project was directed by Joseph Sargent, fresh from a TV career, but who would go on to make The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 a few years later, followed by dozens of forgettable films, really. Also Jaws 3. Now, his camera work is mostly static. The design is minimalist, and the colours, they're quite muted also, and quite sterile, which, to be honest, perfectly match the film's themes of detachment and control. Now, one of the most effective techniques Sargent employs here, for me, is silence. The dramatic score that you may find in many sci-fi movies is mostly replaced here with moments of eerie quiet, or just the mechanical drone of Colossus's voice. The voice itself provided by actor Paul Frees. It's deep and slow and without emotion. And much like HAL 9000 in Kubrick's film, every line spoken by Colossus is chilling, not because of what it does say, but because of how calmly and certainly it says it. So even though the Forbin Project is a true product of Cold War paranoia, it does also grapple with issues that are even more relevant today. The rise of AI, the balance between technology and freedom. In an age where we increasingly rely upon algorithms to make decisions for us, or to govern everything from finance to warfare, the film feels less like some dusty old relic and more like a worryingly accurate prophecy. Now, the cleverness of the film, I feel, is that it refuses to be preachy or to provide any easy answers. It actually asks more questions of us, I think. Can we build machines that won't eventually outthink us? Can a machine be evil? And certainly, as the Cold War became nuclear, is peace worth the price of freedom? Now, much like 1983's War Games, Colossus the Forbin Project may not have the flashy effects or CGI spectacle of later AI-themed movies like the Terminator franchise, but that also means that its central message doesn't get lost in shootouts and exploding buildings. Now, as both a product of its time and a cautious look ahead, Colossus stands out as one of the most intelligent and unnerving science fiction movies of the 1970s and beyond. It's not the most well-known movie by any measure, but it's a must-watch for fans of this kind of cerebral science fiction, and also of political thrillers, and certainly for anyone concerned with the ethics of artificial intelligence. Go check it out.